So have you all seen this movie yet? Yeah, the kids are saying yeah. This is Aladdin from 2019, just a few months ago came out. And this is Will Smith playing Aladdin. It's not Robin Williams. And to Will Smith's credit, he owned the part himself rather than to try to replace Robin Williams, which you can't do, right? And so this is at the beginning of the movie. And Aladdin has just met the princess. And oh my, she's beautiful, and he would like to get to know her better. But, you know, he has a problem. He's a street rat. And he knows it. And everyone he meets tells him just exactly that. He is nothing more than a street rat. Well, you know the story from there, right? Eventually, by hook and by crook, he comes across this lamp, and he rubs the lamp, and out pops Will Smith, a.k.a. the genie. And now he has all of these wishes. And a genie can provide anything you want. Power, money, jewels. There's some things he can't provide. He can't make the princess fall in love with him. He can't bring people back from the dead. He can't do those things, but he can provide anything else. Anything Aladdin wants, he can have. Sounds pretty good. Except there's really only one problem with that. And that is this. Having all of those things can change how you look to the rest of the world. But it can't change who you are on the inside. I'd like you to think about that for a minute. We're going to get to Daniel here in a few minutes, but for right now, let's just sing. Okay, so we're second week in a sermon series called God and the Tough Stuff. I developed this series actually with all 52 weeks of the year last fall. I decided I was going to put together a year's worth of lessons, a year's worth of sermons, and I thought this would be a good time to talk about those kinds of things, God and the tough stuff. And of course, this lesson that was just read, that Jennifer just read, was like top on my list of things that we had to talk about while we're doing this sermon series. I mean, it's just perfect. You have these three men who, because of circumstances beyond their control, end up in a fiery furnace under the wrath of a king. And so they're in the fires of life itself. They are being persecuted. They are being they're being tested and trialed. And you find out that the fires don't consume them. And in fact, there's not 3 of them in there. There's 4 of them in there. They throw 3 in the fire, but Nebuchadnezzar, the king, who has done this to them, sees 4 figures in the fire. And one of them is God. Well, if you're talking about God and the tough stuff, it doesn't get much better than that, right? I mean, I could spend the whole hour just talking about that. But then I got to studying this lesson. And oh my, there's some interesting things that are going on sort of beside all of this. And it really lays another layer over the top of that basic story. So, for instance, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These are the 3 guys that land in the fire. That's not their real names. Did you know that? I've read Daniel, 5 or 6 times, front to cover. I never really caught what was going on with the change of names. So if you open your books, your Bibles to Daniel chapter 1. Oh, that's right, we're Lutherans. If you were to open your Bibles to Daniel chapter 1, you will see this. These three men, and they're really not men, they're still boys. They're young boys, really just about to become men. Shelley, would you put this first slide up? Their names, they're Jewish boys with Jewish names. Okay, and so there you have it there. One is called Hananiah. The second one is called Mishael, and the third one is Azariah. And behind the names, those are the meanings of each of the names. Now remember, these are Jewish boys, and so if you look at the end of the name, which is short for Yahweh, right? That we know that is the name of God, and El is short for Elohim, another name for the God of the Jews. And so Hananiah, God is gracious. The God of the Jews is gracious, right? Mishael, who else is like our God? And then finally, Azariah, God keeps him. God protects him. God takes care of him. So, what's interesting here is, as Jews, they are not in a good place right now. Nebuchadnezzar, who is the king, and he is king of a country called Babylon. It's an empire. It's one of the great countries of the time. His army has stormed Jerusalem. It's brought down the city walls. He has taken people captive. He's taken the temple of God and turned it into a pile of rubble. Now, I want you to think about this as well, because the army who wins in battle, their God is better than the God of the army that loses in battle. All right? You got that? So the God of the Jews, not only did they suffer a defeat, but his house of worship has been leveled. Okay? And then these people who follow this God have been captured and are carried off to the Babylonian homeland, where they will live in humiliation for a generation. So Nebuchadnezzar realizes that he has these people here. He has a resource. And so he commands that some young boys be trained as pages for his court. And among them are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And then he starts converting them into something else. Shelley, could you show us the next slide here? They now have new names: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Look at these names. So Shadrach, under Ak's command, Aku. Aku is the moon god of the Babylonian Empire. All right? Meshach, under the moon god's shadow. And Abednego, he's the servant of Nego, who is the god of wisdom. So right away, Nebuchadnezzar takes these three Jewish boys. Their homeland has been decimated. They are, in everybody's mind, especially Nebuchadnezzar's, they are street rats, right? And he gives them new names. He gives them names of nobility, names that are important, names that when they walk around Babylon, they will be respected, as opposed to these Jewish names. And then, chapter 1, still, Nebuchadnezzar has them trained. He teaches them the Babylonian language. He teaches them to read and write. He feeds them, and not just any food, but they eat the same food that the king eats and drink the same wine that the king drinks. And this happens for 3 years until their education is complete, and now they have been transformed. Boom, they are Babylonians through and through, and they will serve the king as page boys. See, he's taken street rats, and by his gracious will, has turned them into something important. Except for all of Nebuchadnezzar's wisdom and all of Nebuchadnezzar's power and might and authority, he's really missed the pitch, hasn't he? Because you can change everything on the outside, but you can't change what's inside. And he misses that. He doesn't see it. They're street rats. and they will always be street rats. It's who they are. So now we're in Daniel chapter 3. And Nebuchadnezzar, you just heard the story, beautifully read. Sorry it was such a long lesson, but I really felt like we had to have the whole thing out there. Nebuchadnezzar has this golden statue that's built, and it is huge. And then he says, everyone will bow down. He doesn't even call it a god. He says, they'll bow down to my statue. All right? And by the way, don't miss the details. Don't miss the humor. If you read this with a sense of humor to it, you will. It's just so much fun to read. So everyone will bow down to this. And so he's got these 3 page boys who are now Babylonians, and they see right through it. They see that it's just a piece of gold. And the Nebuchadnezzar is just a man among men, and they refuse. And basically when they refuse, what they're saying is, you know, Nebuchadnezzar, you're just a street rat just like us. You just happen to be dressed up a little bit better, and you happen to eat a little better food. Well, Nebuchadnezzar is furious. He says, I want these people burned. Tie them up, leave them in their clothes. Evidently, when they threw them in the fire to kill them, they took their clothes off. But he left the clothes on, bind them up, tie them up. You see, and then throw them in the furnace. By the way, stoke the furnace 7 times hotter than it usually is when we do this to people. Make sure they fry. So those who bind them up, get them to the top of the furnace, and they start throwing them in, but the furnace is so hot that the people who are throwing them in get burned up themselves. And there they are, down in the furnace, and they're not bound. They are walking around inside the furnace. They're not racing out of the furnace. They're walking around inside the furnace. And there is 4 of them. Isn't that something? You see, they want to be who they are. They know their God. Actually, they don't want to be who they are. They know whose they are. Their God is the God of all power, the God of all might, the God who makes the greatest king on earth look like a street rat. And they are so convinced of this, and they so want to be his. I'd like you, when you get home, take a look at verse 17 and 18, because what they say is astounding. If it is to be so, we will not be burned up, and the king will see that our God is true. But if it's not to be so, we will not follow your God. In another place in the Bible, Paul says it like this: if I live, I live to the Lord. If I die, I die to the Lord. So then, whether I live or whether I die, I belong to God. Not even the fires of Nebuchadnezzar's furnace, stoked up 7 times hotter, can change that. And when they come out of the furnace, you can't even smell the smoke. Let's sing. Okay, so I have one more clip for you, but before we get to it, I just want to set it up. So Aladdin has had this conversation with the genie, and he says, I want to be a prince. because he wants Jasmine to be his wife. And so the genie makes him a prince, and as a prince, he goes to the princess for the first time. She can't really tell who it is because he's in different clothes. He looks different. Her eyes are sort of shielded from who he is as a street rat. And nothing goes right. He trips over his tongue. He can't say anything right. He keeps embarrassing himself. He keeps offending the people he's trying to impress. And here's the conversation between Aladdin and the genie. And that's the problem. He's trying so hard. Yeah. So, as I said a little bit earlier, I know the basic story. It's a story about going through the fires, but there's something more important going on here. There's a bigger question at bay. Question's this: who are you? To whom do you belong? Because you see, we all have our genies that we look to. Friends, family, homes, cars, wealth, good stock portfolio, certain position in the community, clothes, a certain look, a certain group that we hang with. We have these genies and we look to them to make us what we are. And you know, it's just going to get us in trouble. Because who you are not those things. Who are you? You're a child of God. You belong to the one who is majestic beyond all measure, so large, so powerful, and yet he loves you. And what's more is, he has a plan for your life, and it doesn't include you chasing after magic genies with empty promises, because those promises can't deliver what you think they might deliver. Who are you? Ask yourself. Because here's the real deal, folks. Someday the fires will come. I can promise you that. They come to everyone. Every single one of us. And then the question becomes real. Who are you? Well, you know who you are. You belong to God. You are God's child. That's a given. But why not live in it now? Because as those fires come, if you're convinced that the magic genies are going to deliver you from the fire, then you just end up going round in circles. You look to this thing or that thing. Yada, yada, yada. That's gonna save you from that trial, save you from that fire, raise you up and make you important, or whatever it happens to be. And when it doesn't work, you go to the next something, the next yada, yada, yada. And it does the same thing. And then you go to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And pretty soon, you're frustrated, you're lost, you're alone. Don't let those things name you like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You've been named by the creator of the universe. Own it. Live in it. Know that it is yours and cling to it every single moment of your life, because that God alone will save you. That God alone will bring you peace in the fires and comfort in the trials, and it will raise you up in new life no matter what it is you face. And for that we give him thanks and praise. Amen.